Love those guys. How are you, my holy sisters and brothers? A good and Erev Shabbos. Shabbos is starting in a few hours. Good Hodesh and Hodesh Tov. We wish each other a good month. Today is the first day of the Hebrew month of Adar, which includes Purim. This is a month of joy. We purposely increase our joy every day of this month. That was the Moshav Band singing, what's the name of that song? Mizmor Shiru, a song for the king. It's taken from the Kabbalah Shabbos liturgy, the psalms and songs with which we welcome Shabbos on Friday nights. Let's light up the darkness. Who is with us as we get it going on a Friday afternoon? Stephen in Dover, New Hampshire, Pauline in Arkansas, Paula in Chicago, Renee in Indy wishing us all caps good Shabbos, Tom in Pennsylvania, Paula with some lovely emojis, Nicholas in Portland, Cristo, a good Shabbos from a very cold Lubbock, Texas, 18 degrees here. I thought Texas was like tropical, right? Like Florida, it's south. No, 18 degrees in Texas? Wow, who knew? Samantha, good Shabbos. Christo says music sounds like Moshav. You recognized it. Florence says shalom from Italy. Welcome, Florence. Great to have you with us. Nicholas loves the festive music. Sharon in New Jersey wishing us a Hodesh Tov. Randy, a Hodesh Tov and Shabbat Shalom from Florida. Anne in Merced, Christo, Hodesh Tov to everyone. Tom said the same. Sorry, Facebook keeps jumping on me. Patrick Weiss in Palm Springs. John in the time zone. Lucy in Minnesota. Patrick in Palm Springs. Don Terry in Columbia, Tennessee. Ralph Woken in Porto, Portugal. Welcome, Ralph. It's great to have you with us. Aaron Bailey wishing everyone a good Shabbos. And over there on the YouTube side, Marjorie in Georgia and Lynn in North Texas. Welcome, everybody. Okay, just a few things before we get to our daf. First of all, it's Yitzi Hurwitz, Rabbi Yitzi Hurwitz's birthday is on Sunday. He's a Chabad rabbi with a huge spirit, an incredible, incredible guy. I've sat with him a few times. He has ALS. His body has become completely paralyzed. He only communicates with his eyes by moving a cursor on a screen that can receive the movement of his eyes. His birthday is Sunday. This rabbi with ALS, what he wants most in the world is that people should do mitzvahs. They should do acts of kindness. If they're Jews, the men should wrap tefillin, the women should light Shabbos candles, or you should give to charity. There's so many different mitzvahs to do. So let's give Rabbi Yitzi, who's bound there in his bed here in LA, let's give him the gift of mitzvahs. They're having a campaign. They're trying to acquire 20,000 mitzvahs, right? People sign up. I've signed up that for 10 days. I give a little charity every morning. I'm going to give extra charity every morning in Yitzi's honor, so that counts as 10 mitzvahs. Sign up to do some mitzvahs for Yitzi. Let's give him the gift of our good deeds and other mitzvahs. Also, this is a special, when things are normal and we go to synagogue with all our friends. So this Shabbos is Shabbos Shekalim. Parshat Shekalim, right? So normally, if we were all going to synagogue, and I know some synagogues are open, thank God, we're going to have our backyard minyan. In our backyard minyan, we generally have one Torah. So we're not going to have the treat of seeing 3 Sefer Torahs brought out, which we would normally do when Shabbos falls out this way, that Rosh Chodesh Adar, the first day of the Hebrew month of Adar, is on Shabbos, right? It's a 2-day Rosh Chodesh, today and tomorrow. And so there's a special Torah portion that we read for Rosh Chodesh. There's, of course, the normal Saturday morning. We read that week's Torah portion. And this is the first of the special Shabbos, the first of the special Shabbats where we read particular readings in a sequence that leads to Pesach, Passover. We're actually already in the countdown to Passover. This is Parsha Shekalim. So there's a special reading that we do. I think it's from Exodus 30. And this is where after the incident of the golden calf, and it's very terrible what we did, we the children of Israel out there in the desert, having just so soon after receiving the Torah at Mount Sinai. And then Moses was up receiving the dictation, as it were, of the rest of the Torah. We just heard God give the first 2 of the 10 commandments. It was too overwhelming for all of us. And so he said, Moses, you go up, you talk to God, you receive the Torah. We'll wait down here. Moses basically said, I'll be back in 40 days. We counted wrong. It was like he was half a day late. We said, oh my gosh, this Moses, he's not coming back. We freaked out. We told Aaron to make an idol, and that was the incident of the golden calf. It was terrible. We know that God hates idolatry, and this was a form of idolatry. People explain that the children of Israel knew that God was God. They just thought Moses was gone, and they wanted this golden calf to intercede between them and God because God is so powerful and overwhelming. But it was still an idol that was built. We're not going to minimize that. And when Moses did come back, he was furious, and rightfully so. And there were a lot of people, the sort of instigators of the golden calf insurrection, ended up getting killed. I mean, Moses and his brethren, the Levium, went in and killed a lot of the people who were really leading the dancing and drinking and fornicating that was going on around the golden calf, etc. After that whole incident was over, God commanded that we do a count of the Jewish people. But the Torah in this passage and elsewhere explains that we do not count Jews like 1, 2, 3, 4. How do we count Jews when we need to do a census, when we need to do a count? We do it through some kind of indirect counting. So, for example, when you have a minyan, and you need 10 in a traditional Jewish prayer service, you need 10 adult men to be present in order to do the communal prayers that can only be said in the presence of a minyan, of a quorum. So you need to have 10. When you're not sure, 10 is one of those numbers that just at a glance, you can't tell if you've got 10 people or not. You have to count them. But you can't count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sometimes we say missing 1, missing 2, missing 3, or missing 10, missing 9, missing 8, etc. We count backwards. Or a nice way to count is actually you just say to yourself, because you don't want to make a bracha in vain, a blessing in vain, but the words of the hamotzi, the blessing over bread, has 10 words in it. There's other verses that can be used for this same purpose, but it's that same idea. We don't count Jews, and so when the Jews needed to be counted, when the children of Israel needed to be counted after the incident of the golden calf, God said, have everybody donate a half shekel. So the smallest coin available, I guess, a very small coin. And then those coins were counted, and that's how we knew how many people were still there. Now, we learn a lot of teachings out from this that, every Jew had to contribute, every Jew who was present, and there were a lot of people who had joined the Jewish people when they left out of Egypt and became part of the Jewish people. And at that time, we counted everybody with this half shekel, and everyone gave the same amount. It's not that the rich people gave many shekels and the poor people gave tinier fractions of shekels. Everyone was liable to give a half shekel in order to be counted. And we learn a lot of things from that, including that every soul is precious and every soul is needed to fulfill the mission that we're all here for. We really need to be unified in order to fulfill our mission in this world, the mission for which we all as souls were sent into this world to live a human lifetime. One last thought, or one quick thought. We've been saying the Shema every day. I'm trying to add just a little bit of insight as we say the Shema, the basic declaration and prayer of God's unity. And so I've mentioned a couple times that the last letter of Shema is an ayin. Hear, right? Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. The first word is Shema, the last letter is ayin. The last letter of the last word, echad, God is one, echad, and the last letter is daled. And so these two letters together spell ayin daled, they spell aid, which means witness or testify, testimony, right? A witness gives testimony. And so when we say the Shema, it's like we testify to God's oneness and to God's sovereignty in our world, that God is the creator of the world, that law and eternal values come from God. One thing I noticed in the prayers this morning is that ayin daled also spells ad, okay, which is the same as when we say leolam va'ed, right? So ad, or when it's in a construct form, can be pronounced ed. That's different than aid, right? So aid is a witness. Ad, or when we say leolam va'ed, the word there is forever. Forever, right? So when we say, for instance, Adonai yimloch leolam va'ed, God shall reign forever and ever, leolam va'ed, right? To the world forever, leolam. Olam means the world. Sometimes it's used for all the people in the world, or all the population, or all the world, but it has this greater sense of forever and for all time, especially when coupled with leolam va'ed, right? To the end of the world and beyond, as it were. I once made up a word that I like to use to translate leolam va'ed, and that would be for everywhere, right? It's a combination of forever and everywhere, so one word, for everywhere. Right? And so this idea that those letters, when you look at and there are no vowels in the Torah, so when you look at these words in the Torah, right? So saying God's name, because imagine reading it in the Torah, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. And that ayin and daled enlarged testify to the eternality, the eternalness, right? The eternal God and his eternalness, his eternity. And so you want to be eternal, you want to live forever, join yourself to the source of eternity, right? God pre-exists the universe and will post-exist the universe. The universe is within God. But when we little mortal beings, fragile beings, we're only here for an instant as a human lifetime, when we say Shema, we tap into that eternity and we become part of God's eternity, which we see in that ayin and daled. Let's say Shema together and then we'll do our learning. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Baruch Shem Kavod Malchus Olam Va'ed. All right, let's do some learning. Where are we holding? This is Daf Pei Gimel, page 83 here in Tractate Pesachim, the fourth volume of the Talmud. We are looking very carefully and have been for 82 days, examining the laws of Pesach. We're in the second half of the volume, so we're examining the laws of the Korban Pesach, the Paschal offering that is brought when the temple is standing in Jerusalem. We are in chapter 7, and today we're discussing the 9th Mishnah of chapter 7. Let us read the Mishnah and then get into the commentary of our sages. Excuse me. The bones of the Paschal Lamb that contain edible marrow, but cannot be eaten because it is prohibited to break the bones of the Paschal Lamb. That's specifically written in the Torah. You may not break its bones. It must be eaten roasted, and you may not break the bones. And the sinews and the leftover meat should all be burned on the 16th of Nissan, immediately after the first day of the festival. If the 16th occurs on Shabbos, they should be burned on the 17th, because the mitzvah to burn them does not override Shabbos or the festival. Therefore, they are burned on the first weekday. Right? So this one is pretty straightforward. What we're talking about is the Torah commands about the Paschal Lamb, when the temple is standing, of course. We slaughter it on the 14th of Nissan in the afternoon. That night begins the 15th of Nissan, the festival of Passover. And the first day of the festival is a full-fledged festival, as opposed to the intermediate days. And the last day of the festival is a full-fledged festival, meaning full-fledged festival that we don't do work, just like on Shabbos. The only difference between a festival day and Shabbos is that we are permitted to cook on a festival day for the needs of the festival. Whereas Shabbos, we cook the day before. We don't cook on Shabbos. So you can make a fire on a festival day. Now, we also have this commandment that the meat of the Passover lamb or goat has to be eaten that night, the night of the 15th. And any meat that is left over, right, if you didn't register a big enough group of people to eat that particular lamb, and there's more meat than your group needs, so whatever's left over, there is a positive mitzvah, a positive commandment to burn it rather than eat it. It has to be burned before the next day, right? The thing is, if the next day is Shabbos, excuse me, if the next day is Shabbos, you're going to delay that, because we don't burn this leftover meat on a festival day, nor do we, well, we're going to talk about that in a moment. You certainly don't do it on Shabbos. It doesn't override the requirements of Shabbos, and it doesn't even override the requirements of the festival. Yes, we can make a fire on a festival day to cook for it, but a fire to dispose of this leftover meat that must be burned, it doesn't have to be burned on the festival day. So we're setting it aside for burning, but we don't do that until the 16th. So that's interesting. We can't eat the Passover lamb, the Passover meat, the meat of the Korban Pesach during the day of the 15th. So we wait until that day ends, and the night of the 16th is when you burn those leftovers. That's what we're talking about right now. All right, we're going to skip forward a little bit to the B side of page 83 to take up our discussion of this Mishnah. The first part was all about whether or not we break the bones to get at the marrow, and whether it's a requirement to burn the bones if they don't have any meat on them. But there's this question of the marrow inside. So if you're interested in that discussion, read the first part of the commentary on this Mishnah. But the Mishnah said the bones of the lamb and the sinews and the leftover meat should all be burned on the 16th. It can no longer be eaten even in daytime of the 15th. Remember, always the night precedes the day in the Jewish calendar. So you can't eat this meat on the day of the 15th, but we postpone burning it until that first festival day ends, the 15th of Nissan, the first day of the Passover festival. That night is when you're burning that leftover meat, unless that next day, the 16th of the Hebrew month of Nissan, is Shabbos, in which case you're going to postpone it till the 17th. Rav Ashi said, the Mishnah's ruling that the sinews must be burned is necessary only with regard to the fat of the sciatic nerve. As it was taught in a Baraisa, the fat around the sciatic nerve is permitted according to Torah law, but the Jewish people are holy and treat it as forbidden. So what's going on here is we have a Torah prohibition on eating the sciatic nerve of an animal. Where does that come from? The sciatic nerve of the right thigh, probably the right thigh as opposed to the left. The prohibition against consuming the sciatic nerve is mentioned in the Torah in the verse. This is Genesis 32:33. Therefore, the children of Israel may not eat the sciatic nerve that is upon the hollow of the thigh until this day, because he touched the hollow of Jacob's thigh in the sciatic nerve. So when Jacob, our father Jacob, right, there was Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and when Jacob wrestled with an angel of the Lord the night before he was due to, reunite with his brother Esau, who had sought to kill him many years earlier, and he was worried that Esau was still going to want to kill him because Jacob received the birthright in Esau's place. And so he was very worried. But that night he wrestled with an angel of God, and somehow he prevailed against this angel. And finally, the angel of God had to resort to, like a tricky move, and dislocated Jacob's thigh. And sort of gave him a limp, and Jacob was forced to submit. But even then, he didn't submit, and he said, "Bless me," right, to the angel. And the angel told him, God is going to change your name, and your name will no longer be Jacob, you will become Israel. But because we remembered, and what Israel means, the word Israel means striving with God, or striving with an angel of the Lord. And so this idea that because Jacob, had this wrestling, this contention with an angel of God, we remember that event. And so, if we're going to eat kosher meat, in addition to the fact that the animal has to be a kosher animal and it has to be slaughtered in a kosher manner, also there are parts of the animal that we do not eat. And one of those parts is the sciatic nerve. There's actually a little illustration here of the sciatic nerve of a cow, if you can see that. And that is a part of the cow that is prohibited for Jews to eat to this day. So, and that also, not just to cows, but also that would also apply to a lamb or to a goat. So if the sciatic nerve is prohibited to be eaten anyway, so is this a part of the Paschal Lamb, which when left over, needs to be burned? We know that we need to burn the meat of the lamb, the leftover meat, but yet presumably it's because that was edible and we didn't eat it. But the sciatic nerve was never edible to a Jew, and therefore one might ask, does it need to be burned since it wasn't edible in the first place? That's what we're addressing right here. Rav Steinsaltz notes, in terms of the sciatic nerve of the Paschal Lamb, he says the author of Sha'agat Aryeh asked why the positive mitzvah to eat the Paschal Lamb does not supersede the prohibition against eating the sciatic nerve, in accordance with the general principle that positive mitzvahs supersede negative mitzvahs, right? A thou shalt do such and such, which conflicts with a thou shalt not do such and such. Often the positive mitzvah supersedes the negative mitzvah. And so, for example, thou shalt circumcise the male children on the 8th day. Thou shalt not cause a wound on Shabbos. But we do have an 8th day circumcision on Shabbos. The positive mitzvah overrides the negative mitzvah not to do that kind of work on Shabbos. So perhaps we are not allowed to eat the sciatic nerve, but we are commanded to eat the roasted whole, the Paschal Lamb. So maybe of the Paschal Lamb, we would eat the sciatic nerve, is the question that's being asked here. Some commentaries answer that the prohibition to eat the sciatic nerve is particularly strict because it was already in place before the Torah was given, right? This event with Jacob wrestling with an angel was many generations before the Torah was given at Mount Sinai. So it was already embedded in Jewish tradition, the sort of family and tribal tradition. The question is even more acute with regard to the fat surrounding the sciatic nerve, which is certainly only prohibited by rabbinic decree. The Torah says you will not eat the sciatic nerve. The rabbis added you will not eat the fat that surrounds the sciatic nerve so that you don't come mistakenly to eat a piece of the sciatic nerve. So since that's only by rabbinic decree that we don't eat that fat, maybe in the case of the Paschal Lamb, we should be permitted to eat that because we're obligated to eat of the Paschal Lamb. And if you have a very large group and you're only going to have small pieces of that lamb to give to each person so that they can participate in fulfilling the mitzvah, the obligation to eat the Paschal Lamb, again, we only do that when the temple is standing in Jerusalem. If there's not going to be enough for everybody, maybe we should at least give out this fat that's around the sciatic nerve. It appears that in several instances, the sages upheld their decrees consistently, even in cases like this where they conflict with a positive mitzvah. So, says Rav Ashi, going back to the Gemara, the Mishnah's ruling that the sinews must be burned is necessary. Otherwise, we would know that it's just part, you can eat sinews, right? When you get a steak, there's sinews in it. You can eat all of that, but not this sciatic nerve. That's not edible, and still we need to burn it. That's what Rav Ashi is teaching us. He says, with regard to the fat of the sciatic nerve, as it was taught in a baraisa, the fat around the sciatic nerve is permitted according to Torah law, but the Jewish people are holy and treat it as forbidden. Since it is permitted according to Torah law, it has the status of meat and may not be simply discarded. It needs to be burned, not discarded. However, since the Jewish people treat it as forbidden, they do not eat it even from the Paschal Lamb. Therefore, it is left until the time when the meat may be eaten and burned in accordance with the general laws of the leftover of the Paschal Lamb. With respect to this phrase, the Jewish people are holy, similar expressions are used with regard to several halachos, several laws, in which a matter was not prohibited by Torah law or formal rabbinic decree, but nevertheless the Jewish community accepted a particular stringency upon itself. So even before the rabbis decreed that you can't eat the fat near the sciatic nerve, this had already become a tradition among the Jewish people. A kind of a stringency, right? Going a little bit beyond the letter of the law as a communal tradition, which then acquired the force of law. Once the stringency is accepted by the entire community in this manner, it attains the status of a rabbinic decree and it may not be violated. So with regard to what is the actual law on these questions, the sciatic nerve, the halacha is, the prohibition against consuming the sciatic nerve applies to the nerves in both of the animal's thighs. The halacha does not accept the minority opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda said, the Torah taught with respect to our father Jacob that when the angel dislocated his hip joint, it wasn't both hip joints, it was one hip joint. And for that reason, we don't eat the sciatic nerve to this day. Which nerve, right? All mammals have two sciatic nerves, one on the right leg and one on the left leg. So it's not that both are prohibited, but because we're not sure whether it was Jacob's right leg or left leg, and so we have to treat both as prohibited. Rabbi Yehuda said, no, it says one. It was only one. It's one sciatic nerve. And logic dictates that it was the right one. It was his right side because he was, as far as we know, it doesn't say he was left-handed, so he was probably right-handed, so it was a stronger leg, so it must have been the sciatic nerve on the right side, and that should be the one that is prohibited. But even Rabbi Yehuda was forced to admit that he's not 100% sure that it's the right side, and since we don't know which side, both sciatic nerves ended up being prohibited. With respect to the fat around the sciatic nerve, the fat surrounding the sciatic nerve is permitted, but the Jewish people accepted an additional stringency and treat it as forbidden. So as Rav Ashi said, the people, because they're holy, took on this stringency, and it has acquired the force of a rabbinic decree that we eat neither the sciatic nerve nor that fat that envelops it. Ravina said, This discussion pertains to the outer nerve, and it is in accordance with that which Rav Yehuda said that Shmuel said. As Rav Yehuda said that Shmuel said, there are two sinews in the sciatic nerve. The inner sinew that is next to the bone is forbidden according to Torah law, and one is liable to be flogged for eating it. The outer sinew that is next to the meat is forbidden by rabbinic law, and therefore one is not liable to be flogged for eating it. Since the outer sinew is permitted according to Torah law, it attains the status of leftover when it is not eaten. And again, it needs to be burned along with the rest of the leftover meat. Now, with respect to this question of when do we burn it, you might think that since the Torah says you eat it that night, the night of the 15th, anything that's left over for the morning becomes prohibited and it must be burned. So you might think that on the morning of the 15th of Nissan, right, the morning of that first day of the festival, that would be the time to burn any of this leftover meat that wasn't eaten the night before, the night of the 15th. And so now the sages are going to teach us otherwise, that we don't burn it on the 15th. We're going to have to wait until the 16th. It was taught in the Mishna that if the 16th of Nissan occurs on Shabbos, the burning of the leftover does not override Shabbos, and they are burned on the 17th, right? If it's not going to override the prohibition to do any kind of work on a festival day, it certainly isn't going to override the prohibition to do work on Shabbos, which is a stronger prohibition, right? Because on Shabbos, we can't do any kind of work, including cooking. On a festival day, we can't do any kind of work, just like on Shabbos, but it is permitted to cook. So since the laws are a little more lenient with respect to the festival day, and still the mitzvah to burn the leftover meat does not override the prohibition of work on a festival day, because we don't need to burn it that day in order to fulfill our needs on the festival. So we're going to wait until the second day of Passover, which begins on the 16th, right? The night of the 16th. So how much more it shouldn't override Shabbos if Shabbos happened to fall on the 16th, right? So then we wouldn't do it on the 15th, and we wouldn't do it on the 16th either, is what the Mishna, what the Gemara is teaching now. It was taught in the Mishnah that if the 16th of the Hebrew month of Nissan occurs on Shabbos, the burning of the leftover meat does not override Shabbos, and they are burned, the leftovers are burned on the 17th. The Gemara asks, and why isn't the leftover of the Paschal Lamb burned on the festival day itself? The positive mitzvah to burn the leftovers should come and override the prohibition that prohibits the performance of labor on festivals. So now we're going to derive how they know that you don't burn that leftover meat on the festival day itself. Chizkiah said, and similarly one of the sages in the school of Chizkiah taught, the verse states, Exodus 12:10, and you shall not leave any of it until morning, and that which remains of it until morning you shall burn with fire. As there is no need for the verse to state until morning, and repeating that phrase adds nothing to the verse, what is the meaning when the verse states until morning, right? It says the phrase until morning, right? You shall not leave over any of it until morning, and anything that is left over until morning shall be burned. So it repeats that phrase until morning. Why is it repeated? It is to give a second morning for its burning. In other words, it comes to teach that the mitzvah, the command to burn the leftover, does not apply on the first morning, i.e. the morning of the festival, the 15th of Nissan. It does not apply on the first morning, i.e. the morning of the festival, when they become prohibited to eat. Once the morning of the 15th comes, we can no longer eat that meat. You can only eat it during the first night. Once the morning comes, you can't eat it. It's prohibited, but we don't burn it that morning. But on the second morning, we burn it on the second morning, the 16th of Nissan. However, when the 16th falls on Shabbos, the burning is delayed until the 17th. Abaye said, the reason is because the verse states. So there's a different reasoning now. That was Chizkiah. Now Abaye is going to give a different reason. The reason is because the verse states the burnt offering of each Shabbos on its Shabbos, in addition to the continual burnt offering and its libation. That's Numbers 28:10. This indicates that the burnt offering of Shabbos may be offered on the altar on Shabbos or burned if it is disqualified, but not the burnt offering of a weekday on Shabbos and not the burnt offering of a weekday on a festival. It is derived from here that one may not burn anything on Shabbos that is not an obligation of that day. So there was the daily offerings that are offered every day, including on Shabbos. And so that would be burned. The altar fire was burning on Shabbos. There was also the Musaf offering, the additional offerings of Shabbos. And we would make a fire on Shabbos for that because it's the Shabbos offering. But the offering of some other purpose, whether it's a weekday offering or a Paschal Lamb, the leftover parts, etc., that doesn't override Shabbos. We don't burn that on Shabbos. Rava gives a different reason. He says, the verse states concerning festivals, and on the first day there shall be a sacred convocation. No kind of labor shall be done on them, save that which every man must eat. Only that may be done for you. Exodus 12:16. From this verse, one can infer the following, that, i.e., the food itself you may prepare, but you may not perform acts that facilitate its preparation, which must be done beforehand. The word only is also exclusive. It indicates that only food preparation is permitted, but not a circumcision that is not in its time on the 8th day. If for some reason circumcision was not performed on the 8th day after its birth, because like the baby had jaundice or something, so it was not safe to perform the circumcision on its 8th day. So then if the 9th day the baby's healthy and ready for the circumcision, but the 9th day falls on Shabbos, now it's no longer a circumcision in its time on the 8th day. So if the baby's healthy and ready to go on the next day that's available for it is its 9th day, but the 9th day Shabbos, we would wait until the baby's 10th day of life and not override Shabbos for a circumcision not in its time. So that's why you would wait until Sunday. Because the obligation to perform the circumcision is not particular to that specific day. This needed to be emphasized. Otherwise, it would have come to be derived through a kal v'chomer inference. That circumcision does override Shabbos and festivals based on the fact that it overrides the laws of tzara'as. Therefore, the Torah emphasized that circumcision performed later than the 8th day does not override festivals. Right, so the same idea that which must be done on that day, we do. To do an 8th day circumcision on Shabbos, we do it. But to carry the knife to the location or to sharpen it, which are things that could have been done on Friday before Shabbos to get ready for that circumcision, those acts do not override Shabbos. And likewise here, to make food on a festival, yes, we do. It's permitted to make food on a festival. But to dispose of this disqualified meat or leftover meat of the Paschal Lamb, why does that have to override the festival? We can wait until the 2nd day of the festival and do it then. It's prohibited to eat that once the morning comes, but we can wait to burn it and dispose of it properly. And finally, the 4th reason from Rav Ashi, which conclude, and I'm almost done, so if you have questions or comments, put that in. And Rav Ashi is going to give the kind of a climax of these 4 reasons of why burning the leftover meat doesn't override the laws of the first festival day. Nor Shabbos. Rav Ashi said a different reason that the leftover Paschal Lamb is not burned on the festival. The obligation of solemn rest stated with regard to festivals is a positive mitzvah, right? So it's not just that we're commanded not to work, a negative mitzvah, but we're also commanded to rest, which is a positive mitzvah. They're not the same. It's the same with Shabbos. We're commanded to refrain from doing work, and we're also commanded to enjoy Shabbos, right? So the positive commandments include making a kiddush and having a motzi. The negative commandments are not doing work, but part of celebrating it is resting properly. And so again, you wouldn't do this work that could be postponed to another day. Therefore, the halachas of festivals include both a positive mitzvah to rest from performing prohibited labor and the prohibition to avoid such labor, and a positive mitzvah such as burning the leftover sacrificial meat does not override both a negative and a positive mitzvah that are in place to rest on the holiday, to rest and enjoy the festival. All right, that's what I've got for us today. Tomorrow, with God's help, it's shortly after Shabbat ends here in California. I'll go live with the Daf Pei Dalet, page 84, and we'll be discussing the 10th Mishna here in chapter 7. Let us check comments and questions. Pardon me. Okay. Sharon Frant Brooks. I teach my students that Le'olam Va'ed, which I mentioned before, that we find those in large letters in the Shema at the beginning and end, the Ayin Daled, which also, it means aid. It can be vowelized as aid, right? Witness, or ad, or ed, right? Which, depending on how it's spelled in, when it's combined with other letters and words in Hebrew. But the point is that other meaning of the word is not witness, but rather forever or eternity. So Sharon's commenting on that. And she says that le'olam va'ed, right? So to the end of the world and forever, or usually translated as forever and ever. Sharon says, I teach my students that le'olam va'ed literally means to the universe and more, kind of like Buzz Lightyear in Toy Story, to the universe and beyond. So it helps them relate to that expression in Hebrew even better. I love it. I love it. So let's learn from Buzz Lightyear, the great sage Buzz Lightyear, to the universe and beyond, right? To the end of the universe and beyond, and that's le'olam va'ed. And Neil adds, did the leftovers have to get turned into a monitor? If not, over the next day or two of Shabbos, I'm surprised no one nibbled. Everyone knows leftovers taste better. Well, I mean, look, they've got what to eat, right? We know that they're not going to, the whole idea we learned a couple weeks ago, right, is that you don't want to use the meat of the Korban Pesach, of the Paschal Lamb, to fill your stomach, to satisfy the craving for hunger. And that's why we also have the Chagiga, right, the festival peace offering. And when it doesn't interfere with Shabbos, they would also slaughter that on the afternoon before Passover begins. And then, so if you have the Chagiga, the festival peace offering that is slaughtered alongside, or it's actually the Chagiga of Erev Pesach that is slaughtered alongside the Korban Pesach, then you would eat that first. In other words, you would eat this other meat just to satisfy the craving for hunger, and then not in bodily hunger, but in a spiritual craving to participate in this mitzvah that takes us all the way back to the Exodus from Egypt. Then we would have that morsel from the Korban Pesach, right? And so in terms of nibbling, right, we would look to that other meat. But if we were so privileged as to live in a time, and we haven't lived in that time for 2,000 years, but if we were so privileged to live in a time when the temple is rebuilt and it's standing in Jerusalem and we can participate in the Korban Pesach, then we would know that we're doing something super holy. And I think we would be just very careful to separate, the meat of the Paschal Lamb from any of the other offerings on our Passover Seder table. And whatever we didn't eat of that, right? I think you're right. I think people are always tempted to nibble, but we would have to be very careful to keep it from mingling with the other meat, because the other meat could be eaten for 2 days, but the Pesach itself could only be eaten for that first night. And you're right, because it's very important. We'd have to be shomrim for it. We'd have to be guards over it. Either we appoint a guard, or we're just very careful that Paschal Lamb remains separate and no one is tempted to nibble from it while it's sitting there awaiting to be burned, which as now we know, we can't do on the 15th of Nissan. We'd have to wait until at least the night of the 16th of Nissan. And elsewhere, there was the question, do we do burning at night, or do we have to do that during the day? We won't resolve that question right now, but for sure it can't be burned during the day of the 15th. We'd have to wait until the 16th, and if Shabbos fell on the 16th, until the 17th. I think the way the calendar has been worked out is that Shabbos won't fall on the 16th of Nisan,
But that's for other reasons, and it's a question beyond today's discussion. All right, that's what I've got for us today. May we all have a sweet Shabbos and a sweet Chodesh Adar, a sweet month of Adar, as we start preparing for Purim, which is coming in 2 weeks. And let's really think when we hear, if God willing, we'll hear Parsha Shekalim, this Shabbos, right? This special reading about how everyone was counted, and they were counted according to the holy half shekel, the image of which was like a fiery half shekel that was shown to Moses as the way that every soul would be counted. Every soul, God looked to every soul to do its part in fulfilling the unified mission for which we were all sent into this world. Good Shabbos and Chodesh Tov.